The best format.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another bite-sized branding show. Grant was still in the midst of telling everyone it's a live show, just as we were going live, and that is the coolest part of being live, is that it is straight up and ready to go. You don't get a second to jump in and say what you need to say. So, as everyone knows that's watched the show before, it's a very cool format, very fast format. Before we kick into everything, I would like to welcome Danny to the show. Danny and I connected recently through a mutual network. He has a really cool approach towards branding that I don't think anyone's heard before. Really, I think it's quite new. I feel like it's a really new concept.
New approach.
New approach towards branding in the branding space. And obviously, we love talking about branding, hence the name. And we often talk about business marketing and everything, but we're back to the core focus, which is all about that brand piece. So very excited to have you on the show. Welcome, and thank you for being on here, man.
Thanks, man.
Appreciate it. Awesome. So before I get you to intro yourself, I'm just going to kick it over to Grant. Grant, give us a little breakdown how the show is going to run today.
Hi, everyone. Well, my name is Grant Tom, and I'm the head fire starter of branding and advertising and marketing. And basically what that means is that when it comes to generating ideas, I'm your guy. And what we love about the show is we love controversy, we love new topics, we love challenges, and we love fresh thinking. So today, Bite Size Brandings is renaming its show by Bite Size Rebranding, because that's basically the essence of where we're at. So, but the way the format of the show is, there's 3 questions, and what we normally do is we give 5 minutes per question with a view to unbundle. But when we bring a guest on, we give it 2 extra minutes. So once again, Danny, just get ready to give us all the value that you can, and we will try our very best to butt in and ask questions along the way. But be that as may, welcome to the show. And Danny, you tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thanks, guys. Okay, so yeah, I own a company called Impact Labs Australia. So we specialize in rebranding for typically sort of, the SME space, which is pretty big. But we tend to work with companies that sort of vary between somewhere between around 20 employees up to 200. And what we do within that space is we sort of guide the typically the leader of the company through that that kind of bumpy first stage of when they're starting to feel something is changing in their company and they think they need to reflect that in a rebrand somehow. So that's where our kind of advice starts, is with that figuring out if that's actually a smart idea or not. And if it is, we help them navigate that. So where the sustainability part of our process comes in is considering all the stuff that gets thrown out in a rebrand, kind of what happens to that and how you plan for the future with all your new signage, the new wraps on your vehicles, that kind of thing. And even implementing things like green technology, digital tools to replace physical stuff.
Wow.
Okay.
Cool. Man, that's a perfect segue to bring us to our first question. I'm not gonna. I'll do a little bit of warm up. I feel like I'm just jumping straight in. That was really interesting. Like, hopefully the people who have tuned in already, or who are going to be watching this later, you can see there's really a different approach here towards the concept of rebranding. And I think a lot of people don't consider all the pieces that come into and get left behind from the old brand rolling into the new brand. And I think that's, the thing that really gravitated me towards you, Danny, and wanting to bring you on the show was this whole piece that I feel people don't really, it's not really talked about, It's always get caught up in the hype, especially when you're ready to go. You get caught up in the hype of doing the rebrand. You're like, yes, fresh new image. And you don't think about all these logistical pieces that come along with it. So I'll stop chattering and getting my own time in.
I think so.
First question. Grant is like, yes, we're done with you, Bernard, to quiet you. Literally that for the first question. What are the components that the links within the chain that are considered within the environmental rebranding? And how do you plan it so that it is sustainable?
Yeah, it's a.
Let me start the timer, man. Don't rush. No rushing in here.
Sorry, I don't want to use up words. All right, I'll go. It is a bit of a minefield and a web of stuff to unpick, because I guess like you said, Bernard, it's when you start with a rebrand, it's a hasty thing, it's a rush, it's urgent. People are excited as well, they want to get this thing done, So part of this is kind of, it's almost battling against convenience in a way, because what we have at our disposal are thousands of options for, let's just take one aspect of a rebrand, and let's just say something you get printed. So let's say an annual report, right?
Yeah.
You've got a million options for printers and suppliers and delivery and all these kind of things. And typically you might shop based on price, you might shop based on the quickest turnaround, and you may or may not be thinking about the lowest impact option. And I mean, I think that's probably a better way of phrasing this too, rather than sustainability, which is kind of a weird word. We try and think of zero impact or minimal impact. Yeah. Yeah, right. So trying to find a lower impact supplier to work with, there's a lot of factors in that. You know, they might use recycled paper and that kind of thing, which is more and more common. But, you know, how do they post? How are you going to post the annual reports once you receive them? Is it a case of you get 10,000 because it's cheaper, but you actually only need 500? And
it ends up getting thrown out in the next rebrand.
It gets thrown out next year. That's right. And the convenience part of this is you really want to just get moving with this stuff. Whereas if you took a step back, you might find that there's a supplier who's up the road, which means the time in transit is lower, which is a huge environmental factor. And there are just kind of these external factors. It's not just the paper it's printed on. There's this whole, you know, we talk about the supply chain a lot. There's a big supply chain behind every piece. Things like merchandising, you know, you might be going to an event and you get these little lanyards with the tags on the end of them. And if you're just getting them made overseas, cheapest one you can find, okay, great, you've saved some cash. But what's the mileage on each of those lanyards to get from that factory to you? And, you know, it seems like a small thing, but consider how many companies would be doing that per year, per event. It's a big impact. So we look at that stuff. We really look at that stuff.
And there's no recyclable process for those. They just come in, they get used, they get thrown out the next day, or they get put in a drawer somewhere, or they end up on the ground on your way out from the venue.
Yeah, and that's another thing you can't really anticipate. But what you can sort of try and do is, you know, think a little bit more long term. You know, rather than making one thing for one event one time, can you create something that's a little bit more longer lasting, that'll give you a bit more life? And
multi-use, or has a multi-use facility, or
yeah. And just consider the like something we put in our we do a big sort of audit inventory at the start of a rebrand, looking at all the pieces that will be changed. And one of the columns in the spreadsheet is end of life plan. And so we think about what's going to happen to this thing at the end. Sometimes you have to suck it up. Unfortunately, there is no real recycling or reuse angle for that. So then you consider whether it's actually necessary, if you can leave it out, if you can do something different. But that end of life piece is something that that really sparks some interesting conversations. And that's why I say that you're fighting convenience is you've kind of got to step back and go, okay, we might not be able to do this in a sustainable way, or in the quickest way possible. So then we've got to take the time to vet some suppliers and talk to them and understand their process as well. Another part of that supply chain piece is, you know, it's not necessarily just all the things that you're purchasing, but any supplier you engage, their supply chain is now your supply chain.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of examples of companies that have done, you know, made amazing progress in their own environmental journey, you know, lowering their impact. But one project, one engagement, one client can blow it all up. And it's really tough stuff to measure, you know, because some of this exists in fairyland a little bit. Like, you know, you think about carbon footprint and that kind of thing. It's hard to measure if you haven't recorded it. But I mean, the best thing you can kind of do with that, if you don't really have a record of it, is, you know, create a record, try and keep some track of what you're printing, what you're buying, who you're using as a supplier. And
does this affect creativity? Like, does this affect the creative outcome of what you're after, in the sense of the idea to the execution to what your choices are? Is your creativity being affected?
I would have said maybe a couple of years ago it would have been more limited, because the options for suppliers were not what they are now. it's a surprising amount of suppliers who are jumping on board with this, and more, there are actually some really interesting options. And I would even say that, this kind of forces you to think of something new rather than doing the same old thing you've always done. Good question though. Like, I mean, there's definitely that's a consideration, especially if you are doing something like merchandising or events where you want to create something that's sticky in people's minds. Definitely a consideration. It's tricky.
And then, is it more expensive or is it more cost effective to be thinking this way? I know you're trying to lessen the environmental footprint, but at the same time, with the amount of effort that is now being utilized, is it more costly, or is it better? Can be
more costly, depending on your supplier. But again, it's thinking about long term. If you get more use out of one thing.
If you create a lanyard, it would be that price that one time, but you're not going to reuse the lanyard because it's branded for that particular event. Whereas you create some kind of sleeve or something where you can change the artwork, you could have them deposit it in a box on the way out, and then next year pull it out and reuse it.
That's right. It's kind of thinking outside the box a little bit.
But now you've used it for 5 years in a row.
Yeah. Another consideration there is your own waste. If you've got those 5,000 boxes of annual reports you're throwing out, if that's an expense that your company has to bear, then being more considered about it is actually it's a cost saving exercise. It's just at the sacrifice of convenience.
Mate, what a moment! Like bang on 7 minutes, wrapped up, done. Oh man, that was so interesting. I feel like Grant and I were both sitting there going, "Oh wow, just tell me more about this. Tell me about this. What else?"
Look, it's definitely a fresh subject, but I think what is imperative here is the fact that you've got to now really think about your choices, which it's not really been a case before. We've always just looked at an idea and a delivery and just executed. You didn't really look at what went into making that idea. Accordingly, and then as you were talking, I was starting to think about things, and I thought, it could be more expensive, but then at the end of the day, it's about the feel-good factor that you walk away with, that you know that you've done the right thing, or that you've discarded the element the right way.
And people gravitate towards that as well. If you're public with those changes that you're making and your consciousness around the environment and sustainability, people do move towards that.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, so I think we're going to go into the second question here, Bernard. I think we've got it, because I've been biting at this one because I kept on not jumping to the gun here.
You're like, I want to ask this one. I think this is a really interesting thought that Grant and I were having. Quite often as branders and designers, it's really hard to put a tangible value on what your brand is worth. And obviously, when a brand gets bigger and bigger, like your Googles and your Nikes, the value of the brand is bigger than the value of the product, because the brand now holds such a connection to people that it has a tangible value. Do you feel, or like we kind of tapped on it a little bit at the end there, does doing a rebrand and having this sustainability consideration, and obviously then executing that through the brand, the life of the brand, does it have a value add to the business? Does it actually create tangible value, or can you attach a tangible value within a brand? Let me just reset this. I know you're eager, but
I won't say a word.
I'm doing it blind. Sorry.
You're going to get the right time there.
One day I'll get this right, but until then.
All right, here we go.
Like clockwork. It is a complicated question, and I don't think it changes. I don't think it gets any easier or harder by adding the sustainability element. Branding has always been it's been a tricky thing to pin value to. But one of the things you said touches on it. Like once the brand gets beyond the value, however you put it, it's more valuable to people are more drawn to it personally. And that all comes down to, people, if you've ever watched anything on the internet, they're saying, find your niche. And this is kind of feeding into that, I think, people are like, sustainability, I wouldn't call a niche. It's kind of a
trend.
It might be a trend, but I think it's actually more of a foundational value. It's DNA, it's once you kind of start thinking this way, if you really implement it, it's hard to not think about it.
Yeah.
It's really hard to step away. So one of the policies we have at Impact Labs is all our technology, so our computers, laptops, we always buy refurb. We don't buy brand new. That's just one of the things we do. Like, we like to rescue things that are still working, and we get perfectly good life out of them, and they keep our business going.
Yeah.
And I battle that, you know, like I have to. This is one of the things I was talking about with fighting convenience. You know, like I can just go to the Apple store and buy a computer and have it 2 days later, but I have to wait till the right computer is available and a refurb, and maybe it's not available. And if it's not available, then the next step down that line is finding the nearest supplier who has minimal transit. You know, I don't know where Apple distributes out of in Australia, but if it's further than my local distributor, then I don't want to use them. I want to use the local one. So these are the kind of things that we declare publicly, and that becomes part of our brand as well. And if people resonate with that, if they like that, that's another little piece that draws them in. So when I say, you know, it draws the community, it sort of builds your niche. It's a piece of that.
And do you feel like customers who have come to work with you specifically want this kind of attention to detail and that social responsibility? And do you feel like it has kind of formed a community around Impact Labs as a brand because of that value that you hold?
It's hard to say. I mean, this has been notoriously tricky stuff to measure. But based on the kind of clients that we get and the kind of work that we've been doing, I'd say my answer to that is probably more yes than no. But I can't answer it definitively. But I'm also not necessarily doing it to draw a particular crowd. It's just it's the thing that feels right for me that is going to suit the customers who find something attractive in that.
So one of the things I think about when you talk about this is that, is it a good idea for the business owner that's doing this exercise with you, is that they're utilizing this as part of their message to endorse their branding, that they've gone to this extent to look at their carbon footprint with their rebranding exercise as part of their communication message?
If I understand your question, it's a lot of the leader, the CEO or whoever that is, a lot of their personal values really start to come through when you start talking about this kind of thing in a rebrand. Or even if it's the other way, if you just start talking about a rebrand, if they have a particular, if they're naturally leaning towards a more green approach, it starts to come out, and it sort of infiltrates the project. Does that answer your question?
Well, you know, basically,
more the public.
And I was advertising, and I was saying, but no, we went in to a great extent to say that we didn't just go and reuse materials. We were considerate as to how we went and did our footprint in our rebranding exercise. It's great for team building for the team and the employees of the company, as well as to that of the clients, that these guys have gone to this nth degree to consider what they've done. I think it can make great value in both ways.
Like, has anyone ever leveraged it from a PR perspective or from a reputational perspective? Because it is definitely something that is a hot topic. I mean, more specifically within your clients, how do you feel they then carry it into their public image? Yeah,
as far as PR, I haven't got case studies, but what everyone does do is, if they didn't do this before, they start to basically just publicly declare their new directions and their new steps and the initiatives they're doing. And that can be as simple as putting our impact page on your website kind of thing, and just tracking and declaring all the stuff you're either doing or the stuff that you plan to do. So we do this on our website as well. We've got an impact page with just a couple of things that we do. It mentions the refurbished laptops that I just mentioned. And it also talks about some of our future plans. So we're applying for B Corp status this year. And we may or may not get it, but that's a public thing. And a lot of our clients just tend to do that as well. It's just it's a sticking a flag in the ground saying, we think about this, we care about it.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I've never really considered it before, but we often get refurbs just because you get great technology, great technology.
Yeah, I think it's better.
Significantly lower than the new technology. And it's honestly barely different. It's barely noticeable in its differences. And you get amazing technology for nothing. Like we bought laptops for $320. We've been using them for 2 years, and they still work perfectly fine. It's incredible how distant the price range is between new and refurbished, and they're basically new, you know. That was I mean, that was something I've been doing for a lot of years, and I just made it a policy. I just said, okay, I'm going to draw a line in the sand and do this for everyone. And it's a small change, you know. One of our team got a refurbished phone, and it was so funny when you're talking about distance and using your locals. She found a mobile shop literally 5-minute walk from her house that was selling refurbs, and that's where we picked the phone up. And we've ended up buying 2 or 3 handsets from there now. And it does. It's like, it's great for the business. It's great for her.
And stuff.
Winning all around. Winning all around. It's such a simple consideration that, like, it just never really crosses people's mind. And this whole kind of ego-driven commercialism, which I don't like, you know, me, I'm not too much of a fanatic about those kind of things.
Brand names.
It is really... it is kind of ego-driven. You know, people are buying new because they want to be able to say, I just bought it new. But for what purpose? It makes no difference, the end result of the product. It still does the same thing, you know?
Yeah, that's right. I got to say the factor of, you know, buying something new and opening a brand new box. It used to, you know, I loved it. I used to love opening brand new things that were shiny and no one ever touched. And that's just totally worn off. And I don't know what exactly made it go away, but a new computer was exciting for a day, and then it just became your computer, and that's all it is to me now. So it's you know, pay $3,000 or $1,000 and it's the same thing. It makes no difference.
But often when you're buying new, when you're busy buying new, you know, there's an upgrade or an update or something, or a patch to fix something because it's not quite worked out yet, you know, type of stuff.
True.
So I think the point that I've taken from this talk is that functionality is key. And at the same time, you know, it's a feel-good factor. There's a lot of feel-good factor in this discussion of just thinking a little bit alternatively as to what you're doing, and then be able to converse that in your message to that of your team and to your clients. I think is great. And when I used the word earlier about trend, I didn't mean it in a mocking way. I meant it in the sense that if everyone was in this kind of zone, then it wouldn't be so topical. It would just be natural. But it's because it's so different. It's
totally.
like that trend kind of movement, but it's not. It's a consideration.
It's interesting, actually. Just for a little tidbit, there was a show called History 101 on Netflix, and one of the episodes talks about plastics and the creation of plastics and the widespread use of it. And there's one really great fact in there where they said if the recycling of plastic was mainstream, more like we were more conditioned to doing it, it's actually more affordable to recycle plastic than it is to manufacture it new. But because the convention is to just manufacture, we continue this process of manufacturing. And then, you know, people will then come to you and say, well, only 20% of plastic that's recycled actually ends up in recycling. And I said, well, as long as we're not committed to the idea, there's no reason to expand it. So if we all commit to the idea, and then that puts more social pressure to then drive the system, the process of recycling, then actually the entire benefit, we all end up entirely benefiting across the board. Products become more cost effective to manufacture. There's less impact on the environment, and the overall process is more effective. But it's just interesting how these, if you grab one piece of information. Like, this is essentially what you're saying, right? You grab one piece of information, the rebrand process, it sounds like a great idea. But when you then think about longevity, the life of the product, the reusability, et cetera, it might actually be better to spend that little bit extra at this point. So then in the future, you're not having to, or the future you have less impact, or the future you have less time or travel or freight that is required for that next process, that next step.
Beautiful.
Anyway,
summarized.
I'm just chatting without the clock on, man.
Yeah, you got your own show.
Yeah. Welcome to the Bernard Branding Show. We're going to find my own clock. Just chats forever. Mate, it used to be Grant. I'm just really passionate. Be quiet, Grant. So I guess the last question is, and probably a question that's on a lot of people's minds, is it all sounds glitzy and glamorous. I bet a lot of people are sitting there going, mate, I couldn't do that. That sounds like it's for the big boys. You know, we can't afford to stretch ourselves like that. Play out what the scene's like. Is it for the big boys? How much can they make more impact being the bigger guys? And is there a space for this for the smaller players? You did say SMEs. What do those SMEs typically look like that can actually action this? So if somebody walks away, they say, look, we can do this. We can be a part of the movement. Let me hit that clock. Let me see if I can I'll just look at it. There we go. Done.
I'm just going to start talking. I don't care about the clock anymore.
Done. Neither do I.
Yeah, I've noticed.
We're all right.
The companies that we work with specifically are SMEs. So they're that size that I was kind of talking about, 20 to 200, which is kind of squishy. Mate, anyone can do this. Anyone can buy a refurbished laptop. Anyone can, change their suppliers and look at their supply chain. It's kind of, it's something that kind of starts internally. And I think the mistake, I'm going to call it a mistake, which might be a little bit controversial to say, but the mistake is to add sustainability as a product line rather than a core value. So what I mean by that is, say you have a clothing company, and you manufacture everything, in overseas factories where you have no idea what's going on over there, and maybe people are being treated badly and all that kind of stuff. But you have one line of clothes that uses the good cotton, that uses local suppliers and ticks all the boxes. And then you use that as your flagship to say, we're going green, we're a sustainable company, but all that other rubbish is still happening in the background. So that's what I mean by adding a product line. It's kind of, if you have a good intention with that, and like I was saying before, you're publicly sharing your intentions and your kind of next steps. If that's your foot in the door to say, we're starting here and we intend to carry this across the whole organization eventually, then I think that's a great way to do it. But if you're plugging that in, exactly, as a tick box, as a product line, I think that's just not the right way to do it, because all you're trying to do there is you're expanding your market.
The big guys do it all the time. They're like, we're releasing a new show with eco rubber on it or something, and it's the only shoe they ever produce that has this rubber on it, and they never do it again. Mate, you're just trying to just tick it and say, we're supporting sustainability.
Yeah, they see exactly what you said, Grant, before. They're seeing it as, and I know you didn't mean it like this, but they're seeing a trend, and they're capturing a new portion of the market that is an opportunity. So I think this kind of really starts at a DNA level. And when you're getting into that kind of zone, the size of the company is pretty irrelevant, because it's going to be, like I said before, it becomes a thing that you just can't ignore anymore. It just becomes part of you, and you just get to a point where you go, I can't do this way anymore. We have to change something. And whether that change happens with a rebrand, or if it's just a new set of policies that you put in, it can start anywhere, and it's it'll probably be guided a little bit by your tolerance to risk, to change, and your budget, if you can afford to take some of these bigger steps that are a bit more long term. And it's okay if you can't. If you sort of start making that commitment in some way, it'll come. You'll get there.
Because you can also be quite small. You can be quite small. You don't have to start everything. You could just start in a certain area where your suppliers are.
100%. That's what we say. We're like, the best thing you can do is just start, pick something. You can decide to be a paperless office. You can decide to add a few more recycling bins. You can change your supplier, bring one supplier from overseas and change them with a local one. You can take steps. And the thing, so I write a daily email about rebranding and sustainability. And recently, one day this week, one of the steps I talked about was it's essentially that. It's just start. It's just pick something and start. And it's I can't hammer that point home enough. It's just such a, once you start, it's a snowball effect.
Sure, very much so.
A lot of the, just thinking about some of my experiences in the past, where you cross paths with some of the larger advisory firms, and they're doing like a technology upgrade, right? And then you wonder, what happened to all that old technology? Where the hell did it go? And quite often, because of security reasons, they don't want to leak any information, whatever it is, they destroy it. And you're thinking thousands or hundreds, whatever it is, laptops that just got, they could actually not only support sustainability, but also enable smaller businesses to be able to access technology that otherwise would not be attainable to them because it's out of their price range, essentially, you know? If these larger companies also created an environment around it where they were like, okay, we're going to take these computers, we're going to figure out a way to make sure that they're secure, no data is going to get leaked, and then provide it to smaller businesses to enable them to grow. They kind of do, it's kind of like they kill two birds with one stone. They're starting a sustainable approach, and they're creating a public image that shows that they support small business. And that would be like a really nice step that really creates a great community and economy around them, and shows that they do it differently, and they take those considerations into mind, you know.
Spot on. Yeah, I like it. Yeah,
let's do it.
Something I was going to say before, I lost my train of thought. I don't know if you noticed. You probably did. But what I was going to say was one of the points I made this week was that sustainability kind of feels like this big thing that is like, you know, you guys were saying, is it just the big players who can do it? And you know, starting small is the way to start, and picking one thing. And the thing to remember with you know, sustainability or having zero impact, however you want to think about it, is it's not, you're not gonna be 100% with it. You're not gonna achieve 100% sustainability. It's just not possible. Like the fact that we consume things means you'll never be 100%. But you chip away at it. You keep finding the opportunities to do something a little bit better, a little bit less impactful, and you just keep chipping away at it. And that's why I think, you know, it's completely you know, it's within reach for anyone.
Yeah. And there is a domino effect with it. It cascades down. So the more that we become aware of it, the more social pressures put on, then you'll start to see that farming improves their systems, logistics improve their systems, you know, freight improves their systems, and they all improve their systems, not because it wasn't obtainable before, but they know that there's now a less of a taste for the way they've been doing it, and more of a taste for a better, more streamlined, more effective approach, more sustainable approach. Boom. Yes, thank God.
I think one of the things that also very imperative here is the fact that, you know, you may work in a company that's thinking sustainability, but at the same time, that impact in the sense of putting some bins out for people to utilize or bring things from home to put into the bin is also part of the process. So therefore, they're starting to have that impact at home as well. You know, it's a movement that starts to grow, and then they teach children, and then children will tell their teacher, and then the teacher makes a school project, and so this thing can mushroom out. So I think it's got great measurable value that doesn't necessarily need to be measured. It's just a way that we on Earth need to be responsible in making sure that we are considerate in how we do things, because there are so many other options right on our doorstep rather than have to ship them far away.
Yeah. Yep. Totally. Love it.
Awesome. I feel like this was fantastic. It's just such a different aspect to take on the branding space. It's great to hear these considerations and the simplicity of it. You know, I would love to see a big brand send a recycling next to recycling bin, or you know, a vegetation bin or something like that to their teams to start the process, to instill it into families. And that's something that, you know, brands historically who have done it really well, brands like Apple, who infiltrate the home and infiltrate the business, create a whole economy around that. Now they're so used to and so familiar with this platform, they don't break away from it. And if we can create that same familiarity around, or that same habitual treatment of recycling and buying, like understanding the products that you're buying, where they come from and what it took to get it there, and then being able to find alternative options. I think that is a beautiful and a simple piece of knowledge to impart on the next generations that are coming down. And we're starting to create a culture that's so consumer that I don't even think it comes up as often as it should anymore, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Agree. Yeah.
We are a consumer society. I think I'd like to bring the show to close with just a few comments.
I'll keep talking, Brad.
Yeah, just one thing is that For the first time since we've been running the show, I have not been able to use the word edutainment.
Oh shit!
But what I did do is I got just straight education, because at the end of the day, this was so educational in the sense of how to think, how to position, how to be alternative. I think was great. So I think from now on, all my annual reports are going to be printed on invisible paper, just to ensure that I make sure that I contribute as well to this low carbon footprint to
honestly, right now, I feel like
beautiful
giving
thing.
that round of applause. I'm just gonna go for it, mate. Danny, honestly, that was great. That really just beautiful information. The fact that you tripped up Grant and he couldn't even use his favorite word, edutainment, it's phenomenal. What a show! What a show! There's a lot of groundbreaking things happening.
It's going straight on my LinkedIn.
Grant did not get to say edutainment in today's show. Done.
We're saving waste already.
Thank you so much for joining us. Honestly, that was
absolutely
a beautiful
great show.
And Grant, as always,
Thanks,
thank you so much for supporting the show and for supporting us. Everybody that's listening, please like, follow, share, etc. You know all the boring stuff. We're looking for more guests, as always. We want controversial concepts just like this. This is great because it looks at the world in a different way. So we want more topics just like this. If you have guests that might be interested or people you'd like us to reach out to feature on the show, please let us know. Grant, did I miss anything?
I think you got it hit the nail on the head. I think it's all about making sure that the show stays relevant. We want topics that will challenge us, educate us, and also give us a little bit of entertainment as well.
Mate, it definitely was challenging. Grant and I were sitting there going, what are the questions we're going to ask? Because it was just there were so many different angles that we could just talk about this and look at it. And we just like, okay, and we actually, for every question, there was probably about 3 or 4 questions. And then we're like, okay, let's simplify. How do we say this in a way that can be one question? It was a beautiful show and a beautiful concept. Thank you, everyone who's listened. Thank you, Danny, again for joining us, and Grant. Everybody have a great Thursday afternoon, and we'll catch you on the next show. See you later.
Thanks, guys.